So, firstly, Thursday's employment data, how did that act really to clarify the Australian labour market question, particularly only a few days after ABS's admission regarding incorrect statistics?
I think clarify is a pleasant word to be using. Look, there is no doubt what's happened over the last 3 months, according to them. But I actually think if you go back as far as the February numbers as well, you can see that there were discrepancies coming. They have changed their methodology, and they have clearly said inside the statement they've released that partly it could be seasonality, partly it could be a change that we're currently going through on a 3-year cycle, or partly it could be down to methodology. Now, looking at what most economists believe, they actually think it's the last one. And the reason for it is because it's trying to become more efficient, it's become online, there are certain ways you answer it that are a concern, and I think that's the embarrassing part out of this. So last Thursday's was a clarification in the fact that they've taken seasonality out, they've moved it to 1, it means you probably smooth out the trend. But in terms of what's going to happen going forward, there's still going to be huge volatility in it, and it still means that it's very hard to say this is a clear indication of where the Australian employment rate is and what is going on in the employment change. So it's disappointing, it's embarrassing, but as they say, it's the best we've got at the moment.
You use that disappointing, embarrassing. How does the ABS move forward from this in terms of their data and also these seasonal adjustment factors?
Yeah, and that's the interesting question. I mean, they've really haven't answered that question yet, and I think that's unfortunately the part they've got to say is that they haven't answered it. I mean, the question was put to them, why don't we do a US style non-farm payrolls? We have the ability to do that, and the response pretty much has been funding, which is an interesting response in itself, in the fact that again it probably admits that their methodology is the issue, and the fact that they're trying to work out a way to get around that, put a spin on it that actually, the market can then believe, because the issue at the moment is the volatility it causes in the Aussie dollar. And from a market perspective, that's not perfect. It's not a perfect piece of data, and that's why it also looks quite embarrassing. So there's still a long way to go. I don't think you're actually going to hear what they're going to do for probably till at least 2015. And there's, we then have to work out if there is a seasonality issue and there is a change in the cycle, but that takes 3 years to actually get into some sort of formation.
So if the labour market has lost some sort of credit almost in terms of creating an economic picture, what trend patterns should we be looking for then in terms of that outlook?
Yeah, and I think what most people are now pointing to in terms of if you want to look at employment change, not necessarily the unemployment rate, but the employment change, you now need to look more specifically at data that was always sort of seen as periphery, things like the ANZ job numbers, SEEK advertisement numbers, which they do release, that has some bearing. It's not very influential, but now people are actually looking at that as saying, okay, well, they're actually seeing a ramp up, therefore is that the real underlying economy? Are we getting an implication from there? So that's probably where most people are pointing to from the employment change. They're still suggesting that the unemployment rate is probably now on a smoothed average basis, correct? Again, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, and it probably does show about par, being around about 6 to 6.1%. That probably does sound par, considering what we've heard out of New South Wales and Victoria, considering how big they are a part of the economy, and then Western Australia as well. It is seeing a slide in that sort of mining space.
Lastly then, how would you respond to the IMF's recent claims that in the next 2 years, Australia could in fact have the second worst unemployment rate in the Asia-Pacific region?
But it's certainly possible. Again, what they allude to with that report is that, again, they are looking at the fact that there is a slowdown in manufacturing and quite a substantial contraction. There is also a slowdown in mining and mining services, which is being a reasonable employer, but it's not a huge employer, and I think that's what you also got to put in perspective. Everybody looks at mining as being a massive employment agent in this country. It's not. It only makes up roughly around about sort of 7 to 8% of the entire labour force. So there is contraction there, but I wouldn't say it's a huge influence. The IMF always tends to be quite negative outlook on Australia. It's understandable why. We do have very much exposure to EMFs. We're very much exposed to particularly China and the fluctuations that come there, and they have a very bearish outlook on that as well. So that's where you can look at it. I'm not surprised. 6.1, maybe 6.4 at the worst case scenario I can see. I don't know if it will blow out as far as what they're saying though.
Strong words there from IG's Evan Lucas. That's all we've got time for right now. However, do stay tuned. I've got plenty more exclusive interviews coming up for you right here on Sydney Direct. Goodbye for now.